basically, without these transformers, I mean, they're going to have a lot of engineers and military guys trying to figure stuff out. Meantime, you've got collapse of Wall Street, collapse of Washington, D.C., you've got businesses going bankrupt right and left, you've got people starving all over, you've got mass chaos, and on top of that, when a nuclear power plant, when the grid goes down, a nuclear power plant must disconnect itself, goes into emergency shutdown mode, disconnect itself from the grid, and start shutting down. And these things don't shut down like flipping a light switch. They shut down slowly on a logarithmic curve. You've got to keep them cooled for 3 to 5 years after you lose power. If they're not powered, you've got to keep those rods cool for 3 to 5 years or they'll start to melt down again. In Fukushima, a month after Fukushima went down, if you lost power for 2 hours, they'd melt down again, full meltdown with just a power loss of 2 hours after being shut down for a month. You're talking a serious situation, and they only require a week's worth of backup fuel on hand at these nuclear power stations. Now, when I first announced this, when I wrote my article, 400 Chernobyls, and
yes.
I highly recommend you read that. If you go to whentechfails.com, there's a first few paragraphs there, and then you click read more. You can get the whole article with all the hot links. And that article is just devastating. And when I wrote that article, I planned on spending a week writing the article. It was so important, and I kept hoping I'd find it was better than I thought. And at every turn, it was worse than I thought. I kept thinking, well, they must have thought about this. They must have prevented this from happening. They must be thinking about this. And it turned out they weren't. It turns out that there's only a week's worth of fuel mandated, backup fuel to keep the backup pumps, cooling pumps going at each nuclear reactor, only required to have a week's worth of fuel on hand because they figure the grid's stable. It's never going to be down for more than a day or two, right? And then and some of the people called in and said, well, we have a month on hand. Okay, so you have a month on hand. If there's 370 transformers down and 14 transformers went down in South Africa and it took them a year to get those 14 replaced, what happens if there's 2,000 down in the world and most of them are built in places that are down and have no power? How are they going to get things restarted? How are they going to get them going? How are you going to get those 370 in the United States and 2,000 in the world rebuilt and made before half the world's population dies? How are you going to do it?
You can't.
How are you going to do it? How are you going to keep the fuel flowing before the nuclear power plants melt down and go Fukushima style? I mean, you're talking such a huge disaster.
Mm-hmm. The math doesn't work,
and
Matt.
they're just writing the paperwork to say, here's the paper procedure you do. They have a hardware fix to protect these giant transformers. Believe me, think about it. If lightning strikes, can you think like, oh, lightning strike, maybe I'll run over and flip a switch and protect my computer? No, when you have a huge storm, the chances that people are going to go and shut down their nuclear reactors and shut down the grid because they happen to get warning that there's a big solar storm, and they happen to act, and they happen to say, oh, God, if I shut down the grid, that's going to be like millions and millions of dollars lost. And, is it going to be that bad? Do I really flip the switch and turn the grid off and protect them? And do they even have that time? Do they have that luxury? If the guy, who knows? Who's going to make those kind of decisions in like 30 seconds or 60 seconds and protect the grid? No, you need hardware that senses things and makes those decisions and protects the grid. You can't rely on a human being making lightning-fast decisions of a magnitude like that and to protect the grid and prevent the end of the world as we know it.
Let me ask you this, Matt.
Solutions.
Let me ask you this. Are there any other countries in the world who are taking proactive steps to prevent this massive chaos that a solar storm of this magnitude would actually cause? Or are they all saying that, okay, we'll just wing it like the United States is doing?
Well, most of the countries, unfortunately, follow the lead of the United States. But, there are people, military reports in Germany and in the UK and in the U.S. have talked about how the peak in world oil production is right around the corner. Basically, without fracking, we've already passed the peak. I mean, right now, fracking is just barely keeping up with the decline of these fields. And they also looked at the solar storm and EMP and said, this is a really serious problem, and, we've got, this is really serious, and this is a game-changing problem. So they're recognizing the problem, but they don't... And so the military guys and the scientist guys are recognizing the problem. But, for instance... For 50 years, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said that the levees around New Orleans were a disaster waiting to happen. It wasn't a question of if they would fail. It was a question of when would they fail. basically said Category 3 or stronger hurricane, they're going to fail. And we don't know when that storm is going to hit, but we know it's going to hit. I mean, we had the Galveston storm in like 1912 or whatever that, killed like 20,000 people, drowned. And they had that storm, and they basically said, well, the next time a storm like that hits, these levees will fail. We know they'll fail. And they didn't have the power to make the decision to fix the levees. The governing bodies had that power, and they dragged their feet, talked about it, even approved money for it, and then shuffled into something else and never did the change. So we're in the same boat right now, where basically it's kind of like an attitude of if it ain't broke, fix it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And also, there has this attitude where NERC, North American Electric Reliability Corporation, the guys who should know better, are telling us that don't worry about that Meditech corporation, that Oak Ridge National Labs report saying that everything's going to fail, because we believe that we have implemented enough safeguards that everything's going to be okay. Now, if the 1989 storm that was 1/10 as strong as a 1921 storm could wipe out a big generator in New Jersey and in the UK and in Quebec, then one that's 10 times as strong is going to do the same on a much more massive scale. It's a no-brainer. And yet, these guys who should know better are telling people in the government, don't worry, it's okay. They're telling them what they want to hear. They want to hear that they got it covered and everything's okay, so they can sleep at night. But the problem is that we have the scientists and physicists and experts that are saying this is a giant, game-changing, game-over kind of problem, and we have a fix, and we must implement the fix, and nobody is making the decision to do it. Now, when the bankers complained because Wall Street was collapsing, they pumped 100 times or 500 times as much money into Wall Street to keep those poor little rich boys from losing everything they got and to prop up Wall Street. And yet, the end of the world is around the corner, and they're ignoring the scientists and engineers, and they're listening to these people who have the profit margin and the bottom line as a huge motivating factor, because the regulations proposed in government were basically going to say to private industry, you guys pony up the $2 billion out of your bottom line, out of your profits, and if you have troubles getting that back from your constituents, you can come to us and beg us, and maybe we'll cough up some money to help you out. And so they looked at that and said, whoa, wait a minute, we don't want to spend $2 billion out of our pockets. So, I think we'll relook at this. We're going to do a new study, and they released the study and said, everything's okay, don't worry. And then when they were asked by Congress, well, what new modeling did you do? None. Well, what about the Meditech study? Well, we couldn't do that. We couldn't check that out because we didn't have the code. So they basically just said, we know better than they do, and trust us.
All right, stand by, Matt. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Exonation, Matt Stein is my guest. WhenTechFails.com and MattStein.com. Follow him on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We'll be back on the other side of the news. Don't go away. Are you considering calling a psychic to read your situation? Then consider David Champion, a psychic medium for more than 20 years with thousands of readings under his belt. David Champion will make you feel comfortable. He has proven to be honest and accurate. He's a straight shooter. There's no guesswork. What he sees is what you get. While he is a medium, most of the calls focus on relationships, not only love, but work, school, neighbors, and more. Need help with finding a job and preparing for the interview? Are you dealing with people who are obstacles in your path? For more information, go to davidchampion.com, $1.50 per minute paid by credit card with a minimum of 30 minutes. For your reading with David Champion, call 1-877-702-8598. That's 1-877-702-8598. Now you can dial in to listen to the X-Zone Radio Show from anywhere in the world with Rob McConnell 24/7, 365 by dialing 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080. If you have a mobile phone or landline, the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is now at your beck and call at 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080, 24/7, 365. Now you can dial in to listen to the X-Zone Radio Show from anywhere in the world with Rob McConnell 24/7, 365 by dialing 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080. If you have a mobile phone or landline, the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is now at your beck and call at 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080, 24/7, 365.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back, everyone. Matt Stein is my special guest. If you'd like to find out more about Matt, or if you'd like to join him on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, simply go to www.whentechfails.com or www.mattstein.com. That's MATSTEIN.com. Matt, as always, great talking to you, my friend. It seems that the powers to be know that it's just a matter of time. You and I were talking during the commercial break, and we've missed a couple of biggies already. But it's like playing Russian roulette with the sun. And the sun just doesn't have 6 bullets in the chamber.
Right. The sun can keep firing, and it fires for billions of years. And, the Earth, coronal mass ejections, that's like the sun has a burp.
Right.
And this mass of, highly charged, ionized, hot sun stuff flies out like 1,000 times faster than our spacecraft fly. And they can reach the Earth in anywhere between 8 hours and 5 days, just depending on how fast it launched out of the sun. And most of the time, these things go off into space away from our planet harmlessly, and nothing happens. And sometimes we get hit by minor ones, and we get pretty northern lights. And sometimes we get hit by major ones, and it causes planes to change their course over the north and south poles, and it disrupts some communication. And on occasion, every few decades, we get hit by a real biggie, and it just kind of lights up the sky and spins the Earth electromagnetically and really gets everything charged up. And, when that happens, well, unfortunately, if that happened today, it would fry the grid, and you can say goodbye to the Internet, goodbye to refrigeration and air conditioning, goodbye to oil refining, goodbye to telephone systems, goodbye to all that stuff for a significant period of time, from many weeks to months to years. Probably most of the population are looking at many months, but my guess is more like 2 to 10 years before things really get back to sort of normal.
Matt,
then what's the world going to look like without 2 to 10 years without grid? And how many nuclear power plants will have gone down in that period? Will people have done the heroic things and unloaded them and put all those fuel rods into ponds and then kept water tanks going to keep the ponds from boiling dry? I mean, so much would have to be done in an extended grid failure to keep those things from going Chernobyl or Fukushima style. I mean, you're talking heroic efforts. And will that happen in a chaos situation? Or will people be home fending off the hordes and protecting their families?
All right,
I don't know.
So how would it work with the authorities? Do you think that the federal authorities and FEMA have any contingency plan in case this does happen? Or is it going to be all for one and one for all?
Well, some friends of mine were part of putting on a tabletop experiment. In other words, they had a symposium where they called together top first responders from FEMA, from the government, and they showed them this scenario. And these guys basically looked at this and were blown away and said, wow, we didn't ever think it would be this bad. And I think in a situation like this, we'd end up being home protecting our families because there'd be nothing I could really do. And especially once all of our police cars run out of fuel,